Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Paul Katz. I have the privilege of serving as Dean of the Cooper Medical School of Rowan University, and I want to welcome all of you to a really momentous occasion for us today. I'd like to welcome the friends and families of the charter class, Dr. Kirch, our guest speaker, Dr. Viner, who will administer the Hippocratic Oath, to my colleagues and the faculty and staff of the medical school, to Dr. James Newell, Provost of Rowan University, to members of the 2012 Legacy Society, and most of all to the class of 2016. So welcome to the White Coat Ceremony. So I was noticing as the students came in, I'm sure everybody would agree that they look great. What many of you probably don't know is they had an exam this morning. And I think under the circumstances, while they always look great, they look especially great under the circumstances. And I was telling one of my colleagues, I was actually telling Dr. Kirch today that while the students were anxious about this test, we were anxious as well. And I said it was a little like watching your son or daughter at their first Little League game. You want to make sure everything goes okay. And so I think it looks like everybody's none the worse, too worse to wear from today's exam. And this is a special day for this medical school. On July 24th, we had Governor Christie here in the grand opening, a wonderful event where we got to thank people who put our school together and really created the school that is getting known as something special here in Camden. On August 13th, the students arrived, first day of orientation. They began class a week later. And today is a really special day where we welcome the students to the profession of medicine. And today, we welcome them formally to the profession of medicine. I think the students will recall on the first day, we also welcomed them to this profession and talked about the fact that from that day forward, they were now members of the profession, and now we formally welcome them. I told them at that time that they'll never be looked at the same way. They're not going to be looked at as they were before the day they entered medical school. And from that point forward, they are members of this society. And today we formally welcome them by the cloaking and the white coat, which is the mantle of the profession of medicine. And I'll talk a little bit about that. And medicine is indeed a profession of symbols. And when you think about that, certainly everyone's familiar with the staff with the serpent surrounding it. The staff of Asclepius, which is the staff that represents the symbol of medicine. The black bag, the stethoscope, the Hippocratic Oath, which Dr. Viner will administer later, and certainly the white coat, which the students will don today. Now, it's interesting. I think one of the things that is the responsibility of a dean in the white coat ceremony is to go back and learn a little bit about the history of the white coat. And it's interesting. It's really not a very long history. And if you look back, it really wasn't until the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century that physicians began to wear white coats. And prior to that time, physicians wore black. We have a number of graduates of Jefferson in this room, and I think that all the Jefferson grads know very well Thomas Eakins' portrait, The Gross Clinic, a very large and very expensive portrait of Dr. Gross in the clinic. And if you look around the room there, all the physicians are attired in black. And also wearing black at the time that was painted were nuns, undertakers, the clergy. And there was a certain aura about medicine at that time, which really was not as much about science as it is today. And in 1910, a very famous event occurred in medical education, and that was the Carnegie Foundation engaged Dr. Abraham Flexner to take a look at all medical schools. And this is a remarkable study if you ever have the opportunity to read this. And Dr. Flexner visited all the medical schools in this country. And at the time, it was interesting. You didn't really need to do very much to start a medical school. If you decided you wanted to have one, you could, in fact, have one. There were no prerequisites. You didn't have to go to college beforehand. And medicine was really an apprenticeship there. So under the guidance of the Carnegie Foundation, Dr. Flexner created his very famous report where he really talked about the structure of medical schools, and really a number of medical schools closed around the country. And Dr. Flexner talked about the need for there to be preparation through college. He talked about the curriculum as being 4 years in duration, which is interesting since there's discussions about whether or not that's in fact the right number of years for a medical school. But it really welcomed, I think, the modern era into medical education. One of the things that the white coat symbolizes, and I think that one of the reasons it has persisted as a symbol of medicine, is that it really recognizes the attributes that physicians should possess. It recognizes things such as caring, such as empathy, and such as professionalism. As you leave the building today, I urge you to look at the dedication plaque on the way out, where we have listed not only our mission and core values, and the core values that we have listed, I think, are very consistent with what symbolizes the white coat. Interestingly, a ceremony such as this is fairly new to medical education. It really began in 1993 when Dr. Arnold Gold at Columbia University decided to institute the practice of the donning of the white coat to really to signify the affirmation of students' entry into the profession of medicine and the affirmation of humanism in medicine. And we talk a lot about humanism in medicine. And while we talk a lot about it, I'm not sure we all fully understand what humanism means. So in preparation for today, I actually went and looked up humanism. And humanism is defined as any system or mode of thought or action in which human interests, values, and dignity predominate. Human interests, values, and dignity predominate. And certainly I think all of us who have the privilege of being physicians would agree that those are the characteristics that we would like to see in ourselves and in our colleagues. We're particularly pleased to have received a grant from the Arnold P. Gold Foundation to help support today's ceremony. All of the coats that the students will put on bear a Humanism in Medicine lapel pin from the Gold Foundation, as well as a card from the Gold Foundation talking about today's events. It's really a privilege for me to introduce today's speaker. Last year, many of us attended, as we do every year, the annual meeting of the Association of American Medical Colleges, and I'll say a few more about that. And that was held in Denver, and this really is the event for medical education in this country. And at that event, our today's speaker, who is President and CEO, spoke, and I think we were all struck by Dr. Kirch's comments. And so shortly after getting back to Camden, I sat down at the computer and sent Daryl a note asking him to come join us for the white coat ceremony, thinking that while he has a pretty busy calendar, he was telling me he's on the road 30 to 40% of the time, that 9 months in advance we ought to have a pretty good shot at landing him. And fortunately, we did. For those of you that don't know, I think it's important to talk a little bit about the Association of American Medical Colleges, the AAMC, which is the national organization of medical schools, teaching hospitals, and academic societies. And it is our parent organization and where we turn to for resources and for help, as we have done frequently over the past 2 years. Dr. Kirch is a neuroscientist. He is had the privilege, I think, as many of us fortunately have had, of being the leader of a couple medical schools at Penn State University and at the Medical College of Georgia. He became president and CEO of the AAMC in 2006. And I think for those of us who have been longtime observers of the AAMC, I think the last 6 years, the AAMC has really flourished under his leadership. And among the things they've taken an active role in is not only the education of students, but the health of this country in terms of its advocacy. And I think for many of us, that's something they don't get adequately recognized for. So I'd like to introduce Dr. Kirch to make a few remarks regarding this day. Thank you.
I want to thank Dean Katz for a very kind, too kind an introduction. especially coming from somebody who really is being recognized as one of the true innovators in medical education now around the country. I also want to thank all of you. I mean, I just can't say how humbling it is to know that on this beautiful fall afternoon, you all have traveled here to hear me speak. I know why you're here, okay? And I promise to do my very best to not dampen the occasion. But you honored me by inviting me. We forgot the mic check. You honored me by inviting me. And so I thought, if you wouldn't mind, I'd take a few minutes to basically formulate a request of you. And I'll have to give you some background, I think, for you to really understand this request. You know, when I come to an event, and I'm sure for some of my colleagues in the medical school faculty, this happens to you too. I started medical school almost 40 years ago, and I still remember certain events almost as vividly as if they happened yesterday. And this will happen to you too. There just will be things that occur that will stick with you throughout your career until one of you has my job and you're giving the same talk to a Cooper class 40 years from now. For me, actually, when Dean Katz invited me, he mentioned this because I'd talked about it at that meeting in Denver. For me, one of those events actually happened before I even came to medicine as a career. You know, I want to talk about something we have in common, but we come to this profession in a lot of different ways. Now, I know there are some of you, I don't know which ones, but I know there are people in this class who knew they wanted to be a doctor the moment they were born. You probably asked the OB for a letter of recommendation just to not miss that early opportunity. You are on a track from day one to do this. Some of you are probably more like me. I'm what we call a non-traditional student, meaning I didn't follow that straight path. So I will confess, as an undergraduate at the University of Colorado, I was a philosophy major until I looked in the paper and saw there were no ads for philosophers. It was, realized while I was very interested in it, it probably didn't have career possibilities. So I did what any humanities major does. I said, well, I'll just go to law school, right? I'm prepared for that. But that didn't make sense to me either. I was really kind of adrift. And between my junior and senior year in college, a friend of mine informed me that I had the key skill that was required to become a land surveyor for the Colorado Department of Highways. The skill being that I passed high school geometry. And I took the test, and a few weeks later I find myself in the Colorado Rockies surveying what was being built then, Interstate 70. And I don't know if any of you have ever traveled west of Denver on Interstate 70 through the mountains. It's a spectacular road. And it actually goes to the Continental Divide and goes through the Continental Divide in something called the Eisenhower Tunnel, 11,000 feet. And all this was being built then. And there was an early October day. I actually was having so much fun and making more money than I was used to. Certainly more money than the average philosophy major earned. I took this fall semester off. And so on a fall day, Fall Friday, we're out on the road at about 11,000 feet. And if you've ever been in Colorado in September, when the aspen trees turn, it's gorgeous. The sky is blue, the trees are gold, and it was just this perfect, perfect day. Well, to make a long story short, as our crew was working that afternoon, in a somewhat unusual way, a plane came flying up the canyon we were working in, and within a matter of a minute, the pilot realized, it was flying very low, the pilot realized he had flown up a box canyon and he could not cross the Continental Divide. And a couple hundred yards above us, this plane pancaked into the mountain and exploded in a ball of flame. Now, I'm not saying this is the kind of experience you want to have, but for me, the juxtaposition of that perfect fall day and the tragedy that happened to the several dozen people who died in that plane crash, we were the first there. There were survivors. Most of them did not live ultimately because of their burns and the like. But it weighed on me for weeks afterward that life is a very serious thing. And we should decide to do something with our lives that is equally serious. And so I became a pre-med. I continued working during the days and took classes, actually pre-med classes, none of which I'd had before, at a commuter campus of the university in downtown Denver so I could work. And that was my path. You know, and each of you, maybe it doesn't have such a dramatic element, I hope it doesn't, but each of you had a path that was different but brought us to this same place. You know, I have other memories too. I remember that first day meeting my classmates sitting in a lecture hall like this and having an acute case of what the psychologists call imposter syndrome, you know, which is, why didn't they figure out I don't belong here? You know, these people are really talented. You know, they've done interesting things. They're smart. And then it got worse. Now, we didn't have a white coat ceremony. We went to the bookstore and bought a white coat. But what I remember about the first time putting it on, and what now I observe when I get to attend a white coat ceremony, is I couldn't make it fit. You know, they asked you what your size was. It's the right size, but you'll watch them when they put it on. They'll wiggle, they'll sort of, you know, tug, trying to make it fit. It's not a problem of tailoring. It's a problem of experience. You know, what will happen over the next 4 years is that you will have experiences. Again, they'll be different, just like our pathways to medicine. But they will make this coat finally feel comfortable for you. I toured the building earlier, and I toured the place where you will meet one of the first patients who will help make the coat real. That's your cadaver in an anatomy lab. Now, you know, again, for me, I can still remember walking into that laboratory the first day and smelling the formalin and thinking, I'm not sure I can do this. But I did it. My colleagues did it. And by the end of that course, I realized, especially when we had the ceremony honoring the people who donated their bodies, that another person had given me their body in death so I could learn about life. How many people get a gift like that from another person? You may not believe it today, but there will come a time when they actually let you go in the room alone with a patient. For me, a World War II veteran, health wasn't very good. He was quite ill, and I can still remember walking in the room and explaining that I was the student who would be, medical student who would be helping care for him, and seeing this look of concern across his face. You know, maybe some of the concern was that I was inexperienced, just as you are now. But I think some of his concern actually was whether anybody would really listen to him, anybody had the time. And as a student, I had a little more time to do that. And he gave me the gift of his story, which was pretty remarkable, including what he did for all of us in World War II. Another vivid memory, and most people I talk with actually share this memory, the first time you actually deliver a baby. So I was at what was then called Denver General Hospital, a young couple having their first baby. I had been watching from the back row carefully. I'd done all the reading. And then the attending announced that it was my turn, excuse the expression, but it's the one they use, it was my turn to catch the baby. And so I knew exactly what to do. And that baby was delivered into my hands, and that attending leaned over, and I was really prepared for the, the phrase, "Now you truly are a doctor," or something equivalent. And he whispered to me, "I really wish you wouldn't hold the baby quite so tightly." But think about it. Underneath that, yet again, this couple had allowed me to be part of the most intimate experience they had experienced as a husband and wife. Isn't that an extraordinary thing? A gift that we're given by our patients. Now, you will have similar experiences. You may have different ones. But those are the things that will make the white coat real. Don't try to make it feel comfortable today. Don't wash it 6 times. It doesn't work. Just wait for the experiences to fill it. I want to, though, finish by spending just a bit of time talking with you about the one thing I believe we all have absolutely, irrevocably in common, where we shouldn't differ one bit. What it involves is our ethical commitment. So I never took a course in clinical ethics until my first semester of medical school. And the first semester of medical school, if you haven't heard this expression, is like trying to get a sip of water from a fire hose. All this information is coming at you. You feel often just totally overwhelmed by the volume of it. And I loved clinical ethics, medical ethics, because of its pristine simplicity. I just needed to know 4 things, 4 core principles. They've stayed the same. They won't change. Every textbook you pick up of clinical ethics in virtually any language alludes to them in very much the same way. And those 4 principles are things that now at my age, I certainly think more like a patient every day. They're principles that are pretty near and dear to us as patients, just as they're central to the profession you're entering. Now, the first one we call beneficence, but it is what it sounds like. Do good. And every doctor I know wakes up in the morning wanting to do good in every patient encounter they have. I don't think, I know that sometimes our ability to do good may be limited, but our desire to do it, I never feel is limited. I think that bonds us tightly together. The second principle, that the technical name is non-maleficence, but the phrase you hear more often is, above all, do no harm. You know, that seems to make sense and be as obvious as doing good, but it's actually getting harder for us in medicine, because the more extraordinary our powers become, we also increase our ability to inadvertently do harm. You know, think of somebody we know, somebody we love, who's undergone cancer treatment. It may be life-threatening, but it also can be very challenging. It can involve harm that we have to try dutifully to manage. Perhaps the saddest case in which we see this is we have extraordinary abilities to keep people alive, but sometimes it's at the expense of the patient's own well-being and their family because of the suffering it entails. We fail to have the conversation about having a good end because we're so caught up in using the power of our technology to prolong a heartbeat. So do no harm Sounds evident, but it will be challenging for you. The third one is really important to us as patients, and that's autonomy. And we're not talking about your autonomy. We're talking about the autonomy of the patient to make their own decisions. It is their life. You know, you may have tremendous knowledge, but the decisions need to be shared. You bringing your knowledge to the table, and they bringing their hopes, their desires, their beliefs. So that's 3, autonomy. And we struggle with that one some. Sometimes I worry about our colleagues getting caught up in the independence of our profession and remembering that our profession exists solely for the patients. And they're in charge. It's the 4th principle that we're really struggling with. Different textbooks use different terms, but the most common one is social justice. I'm not talking about a political thing. I'm talking about an ethical commitment. It's the notion that as physicians, we don't just want to make sure that patient who happens to be in front of us gets good care. We are ethically obligated to create a just system that works well for all patients, not just those few we see. Now again, I want to make the point. I'm not talking about, I don't care if you're a Democrat or a Republican or an independent or a Whig or a Tory. You can have whatever political affiliation you want, but by entering this profession, you've assumed, as I have and your faculty has, an obligation to think about the justice of our healthcare system. This medical school is where it should be, because this is one of the places in our country that has struggled with injustice and inequities around healthcare. The doctors on your faculty do very noble work trying to correct some of that. You will work on that because of this school's commitment to service learning, to having you be out in the community, seeing the problems of health disparities, learning the fact that it isn't just the genes a person is born with, it's their access to food, it's their access to transportation. Though education is as potent a determinant of the health of your patients as their genetic makeup. You know, that's the thing that I think as professionals we really need to come together on now. You know, the United States has far and away the best medications, the best diagnostic technology, we have the best surgical interventions, and we have the best skilled physicians in the world, but we don't have a system that works with an end result of justice. We spend more than anybody else in the world, and our health outcomes fall far behind those of many other countries. And believe me, I live and work in Washington. Congress is not going to fix this. Even if they could work together, I'm not sure they could fix it. I think the people who can fix this are us as the professionals who have an ethical commitment to it. So that's the request, you know, that you remember. You'll have the different experiences, you'll choose different specialties, but that you remember these 4 ethical commitments that we share. You know, I don't know what idea you had in your head about becoming a doctor. You know, for some of you it was you wanted to be Jonas Salk and discover the next great vaccine. Actually, for some of you it was probably wanting to be Dr. Meredith Gray or Dr. McDreamy. Whatever it was, set it aside and realize what we're really here for, and it's that common commitment to our clinical ethics. I'm so honored that you've let me share in the day today. I can't wait to see you don the white coat, and I especially look forward to hearing from you when I run into you over the years to come, what your experiences were that made it real. Thank you.
Does anybody wonder why we invited Dr. Kirch to speak today? We're now going to begin the formal part of the ceremony, which is the cloaking, and I'm pleased to welcome to the podium Dr. John McGeehan. Dr. McGeehan is Associate Dean for Student Affairs and Admissions. John?
Thank you very much for reminding me. As we go through this incredible process, I'm going to ask you to hold your applause for individuals, and as the students gather in their advisory college, purposefully hiding me on this side of the stage, that's when you can applaud per advisory college, if that's okay with everybody. One or two statements. One is, why? Why today? These are first-year students. These are first-year students that next week are going to start seeing patients they will follow for the next 4 years. Something very different in our curriculum, something they've already been preparing for. That's amazing. Second, they've already been introduced to careers in medicine. They already have been assigned mentors. We've already been talking about what the future has to hold for them. And a lot of the guidance that they will get, both in that and in other aspects, occur through their advisory colleges. And that's why we've arranged today that they come up here in their colleges and their coats be donned on them by their advisory college directors. So let's start. First, I'd like the Elizabeth Blackwell College to rise, and the advisory college director, Dr. Aaron Pukenes. Please come to the stage. The reason that we decided to call one of our colleges the Elizabeth Blackwell College is that this remarkable lady was the first woman to receive a medical degree in the United States, as well as the first one on the UK Medical Register. She was the first openly identified woman to graduate from medical school. There were those before her, please come up, that were not identified. And after that, she became a lifelong reformer and social activist in medicine. So she symbolizes a unique and important change in medicine and someone who decided to be more than just a wonderful physician. Great. Ian James Brown. Gita Bairea. Gwen Caffrey. Sherry English. Lena Fan. Denise Garcia. Robert Goldman. Way to go, Robert. Imal Iqbal. Heaton Cath. Carlito Lagman. Aaron McIntosh. Gururaj Shan. And Stephanie Stoneback. Let's hear it for this group. Now, if I could please ask the Harvey Cushing Advisory College to stand and come to the stage, being led by your director, Dr. Lisa Reed. Harvey Cushing was chosen because he was really the leader in neurosurgery and started to operate on a brain when everybody thought that was just too dangerous to do. And as a result, opened this up to a remarkable time where we've been able to help so many people because he was willing to do what other people thought couldn't be done. Christian Barrios. Abhi Chandel. Gabriela Chaviano. Ernest Igu. Marcy Fornari. Catherine Guzman. Rebecca Mecha Lee. Daniel Leffler. Amanda McCarthy. Matthew Robbins. Susan Talamini. Sarah Zadie. Let's hear it for the Harvey Cushing Advisory College. Thank you. Next, if I could have the William Osler Advisory College stand And with your Advisory College Director, Dr. Richard Fisher, please come to the stage. The Osler College seemed like a natural. One of the founding professors at Johns Hopkins, he was noted probably more than anything else as the father of modern medicine, but he took medical education out of the classroom and to the bedside where it belongs and where it'll be at our school. Ryan Belakonich. Jennifer Blesnek. Holly Caton. Michael Coletta. Cindy Kroll. Etty Sims. Juan Lopez. Catherine McMacken. Jacqueline Park. Sandra Pena. James Stefano. And Martin Weaver. Let's hear it for the William Osler College. And last, will the Benjamin Rush Advisory College please stand, led by your director, Dr. Tony Spevitz. Please come to the stage. It's only fitting that this being Constitution Week, that Benjamin Rush is one of one of our advisory colleges. He signed the Declaration of Independence, was noted to be not just a physician, but certainly a remarkable social reformer who went on to be a scientist and a long-term teacher at the University of Pennsylvania. Jenny Akpe. Jordan Barger. Michelle Breda. Nicole Diaz-Segura. Fletcher Drogas. Daniel Eisman. Brian McCauley. Atlee Malillo. Yash Patel. Brittany Scarpato. Erica Schramm. Joshua Weinstock. And Kathy Williams. The Benjamin Rush Advisory College. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Congratulations. We now go to the Hippocratic Oath and the recital thereof. And as I mentioned, there are many symbols in medicine, and certainly the Hippocratic Oath is among the most important. Hippocrates is believed to have been the father of Western medicine. He lived in the 5th and 4th century BC Greece, and he really is credited of moving medicine from mysticism and ritual to science. The oath that bears his name was crafted some 2,400 years ago, and it signals a physician's intent to practice medicine justly and ethically. The old oath is really no longer appropriate, and in 1964, Dr. Louis Lasagna, who's believed to be, has been called the father of clinical pharmacology and was a dean at Tufts, recrafted the Hippocratic Oath to reflect what's appropriate in the present day and age. And I want to introduce today's speaker, but I'd like to take a moment, if I may, to tell a quick story here. As I thought about introducing today's speaker, I thought about a phrase that is probably well known to all the physicians in this room, and that is the days of the giants. All the physicians in the room remember the days of the giants, the phrase, the days of the giants. And the days of the giants, as it turns out, was any time that we were being trained. And those were the days of the giants. And whether you are 80, 70, 60, 50, or 40, the days in which you were trained we refer to as the days of the giants. And what did we mean by that? Well, we usually talked about it in the context of today's medical students or today's residents, and we talked about them being soft, and we said, you know, it wasn't like this back in the days of the giants. And when we talked about the days of the giants, we said, you know, that's when the iron men walked the earth. And to think about how long this has been, that was at a time when males predominated in medicine. So we didn't talk about, that's when the iron women walked the earth. We talked about the iron men walking the earth. And what we meant then was there was it was impossible to have too many admissions. It was impossible to be on call too many nights in a row. We hated going home because there were cases we weren't going to be able to see because we were home sleeping. And it's within the time that we talked about, as giants in those times, those figures that had a meaningful impact on us. And I've asked the students in the past to think about, as they go forward in their careers, the 3 or 4 physicians they come into contact with that they will remember for the rest of their careers. And those were the giants, and those are the giants. And when we talked about the giants, they really were the triple threats. The giants were the best teachers, they were the best educators, and they were the best clinicians. And unfortunately, there are fewer giants than there were years ago, and I think that's because of the way healthcare has changed and the way medicine has changed. But there's still those people out there that I think all of us remember. We're very fortunate to have a number of giants that are associated with our students, and one of them will present or administer the Hippocratic Oath to the students today, and that is Dr. Edward Viner. And I'm very pleased that in this room 2 weeks ago, the students got to see Dr. Viner doing a physical examination. And Dr. Goldberg, our Associate Dean for Academic Affairs, sent me and sent our group a video recording of that session, just as we were recording this day. And I had the opportunity to look at Dr. Viner do that, and it was really a remarkable, remarkable thing to see. And so when I think of the giants, I think of people like Ed Viner, and I'm really pleased that our students have had the opportunity to work with Dr. Viner. Dr. Viner is Professor of Medicine at the Cooper Medical School of Rowan University. He is Chief Emeritus of the Department of Medicine at Cooper University Hospital. Dr. Viner is a cum laude graduate of Harvard University and received his medical degree from the University of Pennsylvania, where he was elected to the Medical Honor Society Alpha Omega Alpha. He did his postgraduate training at Penn in internal medicine and in hematology oncology. For 22 years, he was at the Pennsylvania Hospital and left there to become chief of the Department of Medicine here at Cooper. Dr. Viner is a master of the American College of Physicians. He has too many awards for me to recount here. And the highest praise I think I can give to Dr. Viner is that he is a physician's physician, which I think in terms of how we in this profession can speak about our colleagues, to be a physician's physician, I think, is among the greatest honors that one can bestow on someone. I must say, quite frankly, that I've had the pleasure of working for Ed 2 years. I'm always a little intimidated when I'm in the room with him. He is a larger-than-life figure. I can imagine what it was like to be a resident and student working for Ed Viner, and how awesome that must have been, and how intimidating that would be. So I want to invite Dr. Viner to come to the podium, say a few words, and then to lead the recitation of the Hippocratic Oath. Ed?
Thank you all. Thank you, Dean Katz, for that very lovely introduction. Now it's up to you students to be sure that he's not just described an anachronism, because we have to keep making people that, I don't ever think of myself as a giant, but I do think of one who has been totally committed to the practice of medicine. And while I have a dear and lovely family, and hopefully they haven't got totally short shrift, medicine's been very important in my life. And I'm one of those people that Dr. Kirch mentioned that always knew he wanted to be a doctor. There was never any other question. My father was an investment counselor, and he said, at least give me your summers in college and see whether you would like it. He'd built a nice business, and I did that, and I liked it. But I said, Dad, I'm sorry, but I still want to be a doctor. He says, that's wonderful. So we welcome all of you, families, parents, families, and especially our students who are our new colleagues now in this lifelong pursuit of learning and practicing medicine. Now, we all know that the practice of medicine has changed greatly in the last 50 to 60 years. And we'll be reflecting on these changes and their implications in our Perspectives in Medicine course during the coming year. But in spite of all the changes and the intrusions and the obstacles that mitigate against good care, in many ways medicine is still the same at the level of the bedside and the physician-patient interactions. Accordingly, we can still look to the Hippocratic Oath that we're going to read as totally appropriate in guiding our behavior as physicians. Now, as I mentioned last week in our physical diagnosis class, we physicians have a unique and privileged role in the lives of our patients. We owe them all the idealism that all of you have brought to the school here in this last month. But we owe them the continuation, the maintenance of this idealism throughout our careers and whatever the circumstances. We must understand that we're not always able to cure the patient, but that does not mean that caring stops, because we have the ability to care for people, to help them, whether it be to have the best possible quality of life in their remaining days, in other words, to have a good death. And I urge you to always be on guard for the negative effects of the so-called hidden curriculum. Fundamentally, this consists of all the things that you're exposed to that we wish you weren't as you go through medical school. And it's long been said that what comes out of the medical school door is not the same idealistic young person that walks in. And we got to guard against that, because we should be making you more so, not less so. And I think this school, with Dr. Katz's guidance and the other faculty members, my colleagues, and I hope I'll contribute a little bit, I think we can keep that from happening. But it's important that you not let yourself become jaded, feel jaded. Vitally important for you to protect this idealistic spirit that made you want to be a doctor and that you brought to medical school. You can't let a tired house officer, senior house officer, make cynical comments, who's making cynical comments about the patient. You can't let that allow you to not treat that patient with the proper respect that he or she deserves. And as the business of medicine and the issue of productivity becomes more important as you become a faculty member, you still have to be sure you never shortchange the patient. And there are many ways to compensate for the pressures on us, and you can learn to be very efficient. And we'll be talking a lot about this in the Foundations of Medicine course. And recognize that if you're observant and alert to it, you can learn a lot by the negative example that some people set. But to do so requires the courage of your convictions. As Dr. Katz discussed, the Hippocratic Oath has been updated many times, and the version that we're going to read is that written by Dr. Lasagna from Tufts in 1964. But two last comments before we read the oath together. First, I wish all of you the same degree of satisfaction and gratification, enjoyment that I've derived from the practice of medicine since I sat where you are in September 1956. That's only 56 very short years ago. This will go before you know it. And as Dr. Kurtz so eloquently said, we remember these various mileposts in the progression to becoming a doctor and thereafter with very keen memory. And I can remember sitting with our first group, just as he said, on that September afternoon, 1956 day. And while we are still getting to know each other, one thing is very clear. This is a class of very, very bright, enthusiastic, genuinely motivated, and truly special young people, and we're very fortunate to have you, and all of your families and your parents should be very, very proud. Now, if the students would please rise, let's read the oath together. I swear to fulfill, to the best of my ability and judgment, this covenant. I will respect the hard-won scientific gains of those physicians in whose steps I walk, and gladly share such knowledge as is mine with those who are to follow. I will apply, for the benefit of the sick, all measures that are required, avoiding those twin traps of overtreatment and therapeutic nihilism. I will remember that there is art to medicine as well as science, and that warmth, sympathy, and understanding may outweigh the surgeon's knife or the chemist's drugs. I will not be ashamed to say I know not, nor will I fail to call in my colleagues when the skills of another are needed for a patient's recovery. I will respect the privacy of my patients, for their problems are not disclosed to me that the world may know. Most especially must I tread with care in matters of life and death. If it is given to me to save a life, all thanks. But it may also be within my power to take a life. This awesome responsibility must be faced with great humbleness and awareness of my own frailty. Above all, I must not play God. I will remember that I do not treat a fever chart, a cancerous growth, but a sick human being whose illness may affect the person's family and their economic stability. My responsibility includes these related problems if I am to care adequately for the sick. I will prevent disease whenever I can, for prevention is preferable to cure. I will remember that I remain a member of society with special obligations to all my fellow human beings, those sound of mind as well as infirm. If I do not violate this oath, may I enjoy life and art, respected while I live and remembered with affection thereafter. May I always act so as to preserve the finest tradition of my calling, and may I long experience the joy of healing those who seek my help. Good job.
Notice how compliant they are still. When we tell them to sit, they sit. That'll change. I want to just make a few closing remarks and then a couple comments about how we're going to spend a little bit of time after this. I want to begin by thanking a lot of people, and many of them are here today, and thank the faculty and administration and colleagues for their support in helping to make this happen. We have members of the medical school board here. I want to thank them as well. And I want to thank a few other people. I want to thank Marion Lombardi, who's our Chief Student Affairs Officer, and Marion put in an enormous amount of time and effort into putting today together. And I know that Marion has enjoyed this, but I know she'll be happy when all of you go home. So thank you. Thank you, Marion. To Dr. John McGee, our Associate Dean for Student Affairs Admissions, and his team, thank you. Thanks for the faculty and admissions committee for bringing us such a great group of students. I want to ask the students to thank some people. And as I look around, there are lots of parents and friends and families here, and I know the stories of many of our students, most of our students, and how you got here. And I'd ask that you turn and thank your families and friends for their support now, in the past, and ongoing, because you will need it, and thank you very much to all of you for doing so. I'd like to thank Dr. Viner. Thank you, Ed. Thank you, Ed, for doing this. I'd like to ask Dr. Kirch to come to the podium for a minute. Daryl, I'd like to thank you for being our first speaker. This is an important thing for us to have you here. And I want to present you with this gift, and it's nicely wrapped, but what I want to tell you what this is, and I don't think we could give you anything that's more meaningful from our perspective, and that's a picture of the charter class. So thank you. I'd like to close by welcoming you to all join us in the lobby for a reception. Dr. Kirch talked about the interesting journeys that some of our students had, and I think many of you heard the string trio that was playing as we came in, and one of the members of the charter class, Susan Talamini, who's hanging her head here. Susan had a very interesting journey to the Cooper Medical School of Rowan University. Susan played viola in the San Francisco Orchestra. So Marion mentioned to me that Susan would be participating. I was going to say Susan will be jamming with the spring trio, but it's probably, you'll be sitting in, Susan, correct? Sitting in. We also have refreshments here. We also have the opportunity for all of our guests to take tours of our building, and I'd ask you to think about doing so with the students that you're here with. So my thanks to all of you. Thank you for a wonderful day. I want to close by all of us giving some applause to the charter class.